Queensland is known for its spectacular coastline and coastal communities. Our coasts support a diverse range of cultural and environmental values and underpin local, regional and national economies. The coastal zone is always changing with every tide and storm event. Natural processes such as erosion and seawater inundation have helped shape the coastline we see today. When those processes impact on how we use and enjoy the coast, we often refer to them as coastal hazards. The impact of coastal hazards is a reality for many coastal communities, and the magnitude of these impacts is expected to increase with a changing climate into the future. The Queensland Government has created a statewide initiative called the QCoast 2100 program to support proactive planning for the management of coastal hazards across the state. The QCoast 2100 program provides funding and guidance to local coastal councils to develop long-term strategies to adapt to coastal hazards, both now and into the future out to 2100. Planning to adapt to coastal hazards involves several steps. First, to identify areas of our coastal zone that are likely to be exposed to coastal hazards. Next, to understand which places, assets and values may be vulnerable and at risk. And also to engage with the community to create a shared understanding about what you value about the coast. From there, we can begin to identify and recommend actions for adaptation. In this way, by integrating your experiences and values into the technical and economic assessments, we can develop a strategy which incorporates the needs and interests of land and asset owners and local communities. So what coastal hazards are we planning for? The main hazards of interest include coastal erosion, storm tide inundation, and expanding tidal areas due to sea level rise. We need to plan for how these hazards will affect our communities and the way we use our coastlines. Coastal erosion is the loss of sand from a specific area of the shoreline. This occurs through the actions of wind, waves and currents. Erosion is typically most evident after storms and high tides. We often see a storm bite, where a large chunk of the dune is removed during the storm event. Dunes will often then recover naturally with sand building up again between events. However, in some cases, sand does not naturally rebuild after storms, and instead the shoreline can be observed to continue to erode inland over many years. In the future, coastal erosion may be more of a problem with a changing climate and sea level rise. We may also see changes in the way sand is moved around coastlines due to shifts in waves and currents and changes in sand supply. Our next hazard, storm tide inundation, is the temporary inundation of low-lying coastal land. This typically occurs during storms and cyclones due to a locally elevated sea level and increased wave energy. This can result in storm tide levels that are well above those of a typical high tide. In the future, more coastal areas are likely to be exposed to storm tides, with inundation extending further inland due to a changing climate and sea level rise. Our final hazard can be referred to as expanding tidal areas. Tidal areas are those which are regularly inundated as part of the tidal cycle, including the highest astronomical tide. By 2100, a sea level rise of 0.8 metres is expected. As a result, we will see more low-lying land becoming tidal. Our first step of adaptation planning is to identify which parts of the coast are likely to be affected by each of these coastal hazards, both now and into the future. Next, we assess the potential impacts on assets and values located in these areas and the consequence of impacts for communities and ecosystems. This includes potential impacts on social, cultural, economic and environmental values. All these things are achieved through technical assessments, modelling of different scenarios and risk assessments. Being aware of and planning for these hazards and their impacts is essential for us to build up the resilience of our coastline and our communities. What do we mean by resilience? Resilience is the capacity of social, economic and environmental systems to cope with or bounce back to normal conditions following an event or disturbance, while also being able to adapt to changing conditions. Once we have an idea about potential risk to our coastal areas, we can begin to think about options for building this resilience and adapting. There are many ways we can adapt, and these can be grouped into 3 strategic responses: monitoring coastal hazard risk, mitigating the risk through a range of actions, or transitioning the land use to minimise the risk. One way we can adapt is by changing the way we plan our land use. This includes making sure that development, infrastructure and other land use is appropriate in coastal hazard areas. Another option is to change existing infrastructure. This may include relocating roads or buildings, building resilient homes, or upgrading drainage networks. Another adaptation option is to engineer solutions along the coast. Examples include beach nourishment to increase the volume of sand on the beach, barrier structures like seawalls and tidal gates, and offshore solutions to break up wave energy such as mangroves and breakwaters. At the core of successful adaptation planning is community stewardship, which is already active across many Queensland coastal communities. This includes programs and partnerships to care for the coast, such as dune protection work, education and knowledge sharing, and also monitoring programs which are key to informing the ongoing implementation and evaluation of adaptation actions. While there are many steps involved in coastal hazard adaptation, community knowledge and values of our coastline are at the heart of the process. By bringing this knowledge together with technical assessments, we can plan for and implement meaningful adaptation. Ultimately, the goal is to foster a sense of shared ownership, shared accountability and shared responsibility for our coastlines. And this needs the collaboration and support of everyone to best look after our spectacular Queensland coastline. To find out more about the project and how to get involved, please visit the website or contact Council.